Aloha and good evening. It's nice to see all of you joining us tonight. Welcome to Hawaiian Electric's virtual community meeting. Tonight we'll be sharing information about our proposed Westlock Battery Energy Storage, also known as BESS. The new Westlock BESS will be located within the company's existing Westlock solar facility located in Ewa Beach. The proposed BESS project is intended to mitigate higher risk periods of grid reliability, partly due to the pending retirement of the AES coal plant and the impacts created by the global supply chain issues. I'm Michelle Chang, a community relations specialist for Hawaiian Electric on Oahu. We really appreciate you taking time to join us tonight, and we value your input. We ask that you please mute your microphones, including those calling in by phone, by pressing *6. I also wanted to mention tonight's meeting is also being shown on Hawaiian Electric's Facebook page. I wanted to send a big mahalo to John Wong from Olelo, who's helping us tonight. And this meeting is also being recorded for folks who are unable to join us. This will give them the opportunity to hear the presentation and also view your questions and comments. Joining me tonight is Jack Shriver, the Director of Generation Project Development, Brandy Crabb, the Manager of Community Relations, and Todd Mayashiro, a Community Relations Specialist. We really value your input, and it's really important to us. So after the presentation, we'll be happy to answer questions and take comments. Questions or comments can be submitted several ways. You can send an email to community@hawaiianelectric.com, or if you're joining us on Facebook Live, you can post a comment in the comment box located under the meeting. And for others joining via MS Teams, you can post your question in the chat box. If you wish to speak and are joining us on MS Teams, online or by phone, we ask that you please use the raise hand feature. You will be called upon and you can unmute yourself to talk. For those calling by phone, you can press *6. We kindly ask that you save your questions and comments until after the presentation. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jack for tonight's presentation.
Great, thank you, Michelle. I really appreciate that. And so we're here tonight, as Michelle said, to talk about our proposed Westlock battery energy storage system, or I'll just refer to it as battery for this evening. So you can see there on the map where we're proposing to install this battery system. The battery will be 20 megawatts of new battery enclosures at the existing Westlock solar site. And I'll show you what that's going to look like here in a little bit. The battery will be primarily charged by the Westlock solar array, so it'll be, which is all, of course, renewable energy. The project is expected to have a 17-year life at the site. And as Michelle mentioned, the primary purpose is to improve the grid reliability and support our reliability needs for the Oahu grid after the retirement of the AES coal power plant. And in addition, we have 2 more units that are scheduled to retire in 2024. Those are the Waiau units 3 and 4, and this project will help to keep those retirements on schedule. So for those of you who may not be familiar with the Westlock solar site, this is an overhead view on the top right there. It's about a 100-acre site, which is now full of solar panels, as you can see there on the bottom left. Of the 102 acres at the site, the proposed battery will only take approximately 1 acre of the site. And you can see there in the top right picture where we're planning to install the battery system. And there's that little sort of gray rectangle there is a very small rendition of what the battery would look like if you were up above the site. On the bottom left, you can see a view of the existing Westlock solar facility from the housing area to the southwest of the site. And in the distance there, you can see where the substation is, and there's a little white, or actually gray building in the distance. The batteries will be right right over there in the distance. It'll be pretty difficult to see from the housing area. So the battery system itself, it will be located in that open area you can see to the top right. Currently, it's an area that we've left open when we built the West Loch solar facility. We'll talk a little bit more about that. The facility will tie in through underground cables into the existing substation, so there won't be any new power lines that anybody will be able to see. We'll have 27 battery containers, as you can see there in the bottom left corner. They'll look very similar to that. And when you see that in the bottom left, you see a pair. Each one of them is what I'm calling a battery container. So that'll be 27 of those individual cabinets of battery units. And then they'll all be tied together with 7 transformers. And just to give you an idea of what the whole facility will look like, in the bottom right corner, there's a picture of a comparable facility that's located over on Kauai of a comparable size. So you can see there in the bottom right, there is a solar facility, which is, comparable to the West Loch solar facility. And then the batteries are in the foreground with the associated transformers. And that's what the West Loch battery will look like. So why do we need this facility? It's because the island of Oahu, the electrical grid, needs capacity. And in utility terms, capacity means sources of power. Why do we need these coming up pretty soon here? It's because the AES coal plant is a 180 megawatt facility. It's the largest power plant on Oahu. And it's scheduled to retire in September of this year. So in preparation for that, the utility, and working with the Public Utilities Commission and several other stakeholders, went out and procured, as you can see, 378 megawatts of batteries for the island of Oahu. Most of those tied to a solar facility, some of them not. And those were expected to be in service prior to AES retiring. Now, they weren't all necessarily required to retire AES, but the plan was to have those solar and battery facilities in service before AES retired this year. But as of today, only 39 megawatts of that 378 megawatts will be in service before AES retires in September. The remainder of those projects have either been delayed or canceled for Oahu. And we'll talk about why that is here in just a minute. There is enough capacity, power sources that is, on Oahu to meet the electrical demand of all of our customers after the AES retirement, but the reserve capacity will be low. So what does that mean? When we operate the grid, we always have more power generating sources online and tied to the grid than are needed at that moment. And the reason for that is because of a few reasons. One is because the power demand goes up and down as people, turn things on and off. And also, in some cases, when there are variable renewable resources such as solar, as the clouds come in or the sun comes up and down, those, or the wind comes and goes, some of those sources increase their power output or decrease their power output. So we always have to have enough power plants online to handle those changes, and also in the event that something that is a power plant that is running trips offline. So that extra capacity that we have running on the grid at any given time is our reserve capacity. So the challenge that we're facing is after AES retires, we'll have enough capacity to meet the electrical demand, but the reserve capacity will be lower than we like to have it. So in unplanned events, such as storms, or if a power plant has an equipment failure, etc., that could result in power outages. So we're trying to reduce the chances of that. So I mentioned that of the 378 megawatts that we had planned to have installed of batteries, most of them with solar alongside, only 39 megawatts of that is actually scheduled to be installed before the AES retirement this fall. Why is that? And it's not really a Hawaii issue. It's really a global supply issue. We've heard about this a lot in the news, and here's a direct result of it. What we have here, and I don't expect people to be able to see all the numbers on these graphs. What's important is just to look at the shape of the graphs. There are three categories of costs that have significantly changed in the last year to year and a half. And the first one is battery costs in the top right there. You can see a graph. That's not actual direct battery costs, but it is a cost indicator of the primary component in batteries, which is lithium carbonate. And there's a green line there. You can see that green line represents November of 2019, which is the time when all of those projects that I mentioned were proposed. They were the developers for those projects, including Hawaiian Electric for a few of our projects, were developing the costs for all of these battery and solar projects. And you can see at that time, when you look at the green line, the cost of the lithium carbonate or batteries was low and it was declining. So that's the cost that all the developers built their forecasts on. If you move down to the bottom right, the same thing was happening with solar panels. You can see again the green line representing third quarter, November or so of 2019. Costs were low and they were declining, which was the global trend at that time. Since then, you can see what's happened to the PV panel pricing, which has reversed that trend and has gone back up to pricing that was from pre-2018 pricing. The third cost, which affects everything, not just batteries and PV panels, is shipping costs. You can see there in the bottom left, again, the green line marking where the cost estimates were made for all of these projects. And it was a flat trend at that time. So it was pretty steady set global shipping costs. Those have increased dramatically, as you can see from the trend there, about 5 times. And these are global averages. So individual cases will vary, but you can see here that the cost of manufacturing batteries and the cost of manufacturing solar panels has increased markedly since these projects were put together. And then the global shipping costs, of course, compound on top of that. So that's the primary driver into why all those projects were either canceled or delayed. So the Westlock battery that we're talking about tonight is a solution to this shortfall in reserve capacity that we may see after the AES plant retires. And I say it's a solution, it's not the only solution, but it will provide 20 megawatts of capacity on sunny or cloudy days. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second here. That would be a significant contribution to our generation reserves, and it'll increase our grid reliability if we're able to execute this project. But it's not the only thing that we're doing. We also have several other additional measures that we're, as a company, putting in place to increase our reserve capacity. And those things are things like we've adjusted our power plant maintenance schedules to make sure that when the coal plant retires, that we have everything in as good a shape as we can have it. We are working with the developers of the various solar and battery projects to expedite those projects where they're possible. We've increased our demand response program, which is basically a program where we can ask customers to reduce their demand when reserves are low. We've put out the battery bonus program, which some of you may be familiar with, which encourages residential customers to install batteries at their home. And we're also putting out a lot of information about energy efficiency, which is always a good idea. Whether reserves are low, it's always a good idea to reduce your energy use to save money and help out the environment. So for those of you who want a little bit of a primer in how a battery does these things, because we know a battery doesn't itself generate any electricity. It merely stores electricity. So how does that work to serve Oahu's power needs on a daily basis? So what you can see here are two daily demand curves. And what this shows, for example, on the top left, the green line shows the amount of power on each of the hours, each of the 24 hours of a day, the grid needs from our utility scale power generating sources. You can see in the night until about 6 in the morning, the demand is low. Most people are in bed and not using a lot of electricity. As people wake up and get up in the morning, that power starts increasing. We call this the morning peak. You can see that it peaks out there at about 7 in the morning. It's not that people reduce their electricity demand at 7 in the morning, but the sun comes up. So this is a power curve on the top left for a sunny day. And once the sun comes up and everybody's solar systems start to generate electricity, the demand on the grid goes down. The demand on the grid and on our power plants and on our utility scale solar and wind facilities goes down. Then in the evening, as the sun goes down and the solar starts to produce less energy or less power, and as people come home from work and start to turn on their ovens and their television sets, etc., the total demand goes up. And we see the evening peak. There, as you can see, it's between about 5 p.m. and about 9 p.m. On cloudy days, down there in the bottom right, you can see a similar curve, that green curve where, again, it's low at night. It comes up in the morning as people wake up. But in this case, because on this day, there wasn't any sun, this was a very cloudy day, and so you can see the actual demand on the grid, and it's pretty steady throughout the day. There really isn't a defined morning peak or evening peak because the solar that offsets that is not providing power to our grid. So you can see a relatively high demand all day, and then it drops off. But in this case, we still need to provide reliable power to the grid. So the available resources that we have during that time are make up for the lack of sun during cloudy days. So that's the green line there. And the primary use for the Westlock battery would be on those sunny days. Most days here are pretty sunny. And you can see that during the low part of the day, or sorry, I should say, when the sun is high and the power demand on the grid is low, instead of the energy from Westlock solar going to the grid and driving that curve downward during the day, it's going to charge the battery. So that will raise up that low point by about 20 megawatts. That's the size of this battery. And then in the evening, when we have our hardest time meeting that peak, I shouldn't say hardest time, but that's when the power demand is the highest, the battery will discharge, thereby reducing the amount of power demand during that evening peak. So that's great. It makes the curve flatter. It makes it gives more reliability to the grid because we can take the energy and the power that's delivered by the sun and deliver it to the grid when we need it as opposed to when it's available from the sun. So that's one way in which the Westlock battery will serve Oahu's needs. But in the bottom right, you can see that even on cloudy days, this battery can help out if we need it to in the event that we're short on capacity reserves during cloudy days when the demand is high all day and the power plants are running at full power or near to it. On those days, the Westlock battery can be, if system operations, our folks determine that we may need that power later on, they can still charge up the Westlock battery from other grid resources when demand is low at night so that the battery is fully charged and able to deliver power whenever it's needed, during the day, during the evening peak, whenever it's needed. And that's really what reserve capacity is all about. So you may ask, well, if all these projects that we've talked about are higher cost and delayed or canceled, why is it that Hawaiian Electric is proposing this particular project, and why are we different from anybody else? Well, there's a couple of reasons. As I mentioned early on, the West Loch solar facility has been built to accommodate the installation of a battery at a later date. So that battery has not been installed to date. So now we have the facility that's already built and ready to install a battery. And we're probably the only folks on the island that have that facility ready to go. So you can see in the bottom left picture there that we have a large open area that was reserved when we built the facility for a future battery. And the substation that we will be tying into so that we can connect to the grid, you can see in the picture there on the right, has an open, this is some electrical infrastructure. For those of you who aren't engineers, you might not recognize it, but you can see that it's an open bay. And that bay is where we built that out in anticipation of a potential future battery at some point. And now that we need it, it's available for us to use. So we will be able to just install the equipment on that concrete pad to connect to the grid and move forward. Now so that solves one of the problems. The other problem that we is, it's difficult to get batteries these days. So we have been in discussions with a battery provider. They happened to have a major battery project from somewhere on the mainland. I don't know where exactly. And that battery project was canceled. So they found themselves with a short notice gap in their manufacturing plan, and potentially the availability to manufacture and deliver batteries on relatively short notice. That is within this year, 2022. So we're trying to seize the opportunity to solve this challenge that we're going to have by marrying up the fact that there is potentially a battery available with the fact that we have a facility where we could install it. Now, there's a lot of challenges associated with this, as you may imagine. We're trying to execute a sizable project in a very compressed time frame, and all of those variabilities in delivery times and shipping availability, some of them still exist. So we are moving forward with this project and working toward this solution. There are still several challenges that could present problems for this project or even cause it to be not executable. But we are moving forward because we think it's very important to provide this capacity for the Oahu grid. So some of you might be wondering, how will this project impact you, particularly if you live in the vicinity of the West Loch site? So the construction period, or the scale of the construction, as I showed in the previous picture, is small. It's approximately 1 acre on that area that is already cleared. The construction period, as we move forward, would start in July of this year and be completed in January of 2023. So a short 7-month construction period. And of course, we would emphasize the control of any noise or dust during that construction period. Once the facility is placed into operation, which is anticipated to be in January of 2023, I previously mentioned that there won't be any new power lines. You saw the picture from the nearby housing area. So there will be very little visual impact. And we know that noise is a concern, so we will be conducting a sound study to verify that we won't be adding any significant noise to the area. And if need be, we will be placing mitigations in place for that noise, which could include potentially a sound wall or barrier, or could include other things. So the cost for this project is anticipated to be about $42 million. Now that sounds like a lot of money, but when you take it and average it out over all of our customers over the life of the project, it comes out to an average of 34 cents per month per customer. We're taking several measures to try to reduce that further by taking advantage of the available renewable energy tax credits and other efficiency savings that we expect to see through the operation of the grid. And those savings could reduce the project cost to our customers to about 7 cents per residential customer per month once the project is placed into service. Now, I mentioned earlier that by using the battery to shift power from when we have it to when we need it, that will increase the reliability of the grid. It also increases the efficiency of the grid, so we expect to see some fuel use savings as a result of placing this battery system into service at Westlock. It will also, of course, the primary purpose being to improve grid reliability and provide for reserve capacity after the retirement of the AES coal plant. And again, to keep the retirement of our other units, Waiau 3 and 4, on schedule as we planned. Fire safety is something that we as the utility take very seriously, and you may have some questions about fire safety for batteries. The Westlock Battery Project, will of course comply with all applicable fire safety codes and industry best practices. The chemistry that we've chosen for this battery is called lithium iron phosphate. That is a lower risk chemistry than some of the other battery chemistries, and that was a deliberate choice. Thermal runaway is the term that is used in the industry for when a defective or worn out cell can potentially cause a battery fire. And I want to just explain a little bit the safeguards that we have in place, that the system will have in place, built in to the battery system, to first of all monitor the cells, the battery cells, for potential problems before they happen. And in the event that those problems are detected, those battery cells will be immediately isolated and taken offline so that the fault won't result in a thermal runaway. In the event a thermal runaway does happen in a cell, in a battery cell, and by the way, when I'm talking about a battery cell, I'm talking about something that's the size of a battery that you would find at your house, like a D cell battery. That's what those big cabinets are made of. Inside there are modules that contain multiple cells, and inside of those modules are those cells that look pretty much like the batteries that you find at your house. So in the event that one of these cells does go into thermal runaway, it is thermally isolated and electrically isolated from its neighboring cells, which is intended to prevent any of that thermal runaway from spreading to the adjacent battery cells. In the event that that fails, which is unlikely, the thermal runaway will be limited to the battery module, which consists of multiple cells in essentially a metal container. In the event that that is unsuccessful, then the battery cabinets, which I showed in a previous picture, will vent any flammable gases up and out away from the batteries and hopefully prevent any ignition of a fire. The battery modules themselves, the battery cabinets themselves are spaced far enough away from each other and insulated so as to prevent the spread of any fire from one container to the next. And of course, we will have the entire battery system will be isolated from the surrounding area with a fire break to make sure that we don't have any spread of that fire. And finally, we will have on-site fire detection equipment, which will notify us if there's any problems, and a water-based fire suppression system, which will allow us to provide cooling to any adjacent equipment to prevent the spread of any fires. Thank you very much, and back to you, Michelle.
Thanks for your presentation, Jack. Before we move into the question and comment portion of the meeting, I wanted to share how questions can be submitted tonight for participants that might have joined us late. You can send an email to community@hawaiianelectric.com. For those joining us on Facebook Live, you can post your question or comment in the comment box located under the meeting. And participants joining us via MS Teams, you can post your questions or comments in the chat box. For others that would like the opportunity to speak, if you're joining us on MS Teams online or by phone, we ask that you use the raise hand feature. You'll be called upon and you can unmute yourself to ask the question. On people on the phone, you can press *6. So we'll do our best to answer as many questions as we can tonight in the order that they're received. And if we don't get to your question, please send us an email at community@hawaiianelectric.com and we'll get back to you. And with that, I'll turn it over to Todd for the Q&A portion.
Thank you, Michelle. Jack, we had a couple of questions come in via Facebook Live. First question, what would be providing inertia on the system when majority of the firm generation is offline?
We're just going to jump right into the technical questions. So inertia is a utility term for it's a measure of the stability of the grid and the ability of the grid, the electrical supply, to respond to fluctuations, rapid fluctuations in demand or supply. So that's an excellent question. We still, at this point, we still rely on our synchronous generators, which is our power plants, steam turbines, combustion turbines, to provide the majority of inertia on our grid. We have been doing a lot of work to do studies to make sure that we have adequate inertia as we go through this transition from basically rotating turbines that have inertia to inverter-based power generation, such as solar, wind, batteries that don't have mechanical inertia. And what we're finding is that inverters increasingly have, through advances in technology and programming, inverters increasingly have the ability to provide synthetic inertia, and they can respond in other ways that our traditional power plants cannot. So we're not there yet. I don't think that we have all the solutions, but we're working towards that goal. And we still, which is one of the reasons why we still need to have rotating machines on our grid for the immediate future, at least.
Thank you, Jack. Good question and great answer there. Moving along the lines of technical, we have another question via Facebook Live. What kind of MW ramp rates can the batteries deliver?
Okay, so megawatt ramp rate is another great technical question. So that is the rate of change of power, how fast a facility, in this case a battery, can ramp its power up or ramp its power down. The answer to that is I don't know how fast theoretically it could happen, because it can happen much faster than we want it to happen on a normal basis on the grid. We actually, for utility scale facilities like this, we actually limit the ramp rate for these facilities so that they don't respond too quickly. You can imagine, for example, where you're trying to maintain stability on the grid and you have multiple batteries and solar systems and wind farms that can all respond. They're all inverter-based systems, and they can all respond very, very quickly. And they could get in a fight on, an electrical fight on the grid and fight against each other. So to mitigate the risk of that, we actually limit the ramp rate. I believe that the ramp rate limit for this particular facility is going to be 2 megawatts per minute.
Thank you, Jack. We have a third question. I think the question came in, I think you might have touched on this on one of the slides, but the question is, on cloudy days when PV production is low and battery state of charge is low, will the batteries be charged by excess firm generation on the system?
So that is going to be a decision that will have to be made by our system operations team on a case-by-case basis. And that decision, I think, will be made based on our forecast of how much capacity we happen to need that day or that evening, how much reserve capacity we have from other sources, and how much solar energy we forecast to be available on the days, to charge up the Westlock battery. The system will be capable of being charged from firm generating resources or any other resource that's on the grid that would be excess. If the system operations team determines that they think that they're going to need the Westlock BESS at full charge before some particular event, then they could choose to charge up the battery from the grid, from other sources. Just for one example, let's just say that there is a hurricane that would be bearing down on Oahu, like we had Hurricane Lane a few years ago, and if the irradiance levels, if the solar levels were low in the days leading up to that, and we determined that we needed to have everything fully charged and ready to go to be prepared for that, that might be a situation where our system operations team might choose to charge up the Westlock BESS from the grid.
Thank you, Jack, and thank you for those joining us on Facebook Live for submitting these questions. We hope that had answered your questions. If they did not, please put additional questions in the chat, or once, as Michelle said, you can also email us at community@hawaiielectric.com. That's all the questions we have for now. Anybody on the Microsoft Teams call want to speak or have any questions, or Facebook Live as well? Anybody have any other questions? I don't see anything coming in at the moment. I'll turn it back over to you, Michelle.
Thanks, Todd, for moderating the Q&A, and to Jack for answering the questions. Like Todd said, if you think of anything later after tonight's meeting, feel free to shoot us an email. And I wanted to mention that Hawaiian Electric will be hosting tours of the project site. The first tour coming up will be this coming Saturday, April 1st, from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. The deadline to sign up will be April 1st. Oh, sorry, April 2nd is the tour, my bad. Our second tour will be Tuesday, April 5th, and this will be in the evening to late afternoon from 5:30 to 6:30 p.m. Deadline to sign up for that will be April 4th. Our tours will be limited to 25 people on a first come, first served basis, and we're giving priority to the neighboring residents. And if you're interested in signing up, you can send us an email at community@hawaiienelectric.com, and we've still got space, so we encourage everyone to sign up. Oh, it looks like one more question might have come in from Facebook Live.
Actually, it's a comment. It says, thank you for the awesome answers, and you are welcome. Thank you for the awesome questions. And thank you, Jack, again for explaining. Oh, I'm sorry. Wait. And another comment. We should have more lives like this for Pico and Helco.
Great. So before we close out tonight's meeting, I guess, we have no more questions, but feel free to reach out to us. Again, we thank all of you for joining us tonight. We really appreciate everyone's feedback in our proposed project. We will be accepting public comments until April 22nd, so feel free to contact us. And if anybody wants more information, please visit us on the web at hawaiienelectric.com/westlockbess. And on behalf of the team tonight, I just wanted to say thank you, and everyone have a good evening and stay safe. Good night.